All right, let's get right into it. Today, we are diving deep into a topic that's, well, it's often really misunderstood, the intense need for validation in borderline personality disorder. We're going to break down what it is, where it comes from, and most importantly, how that path toward healing can actually begin. So let's do this.
Just think about that for a second. That feeling where it doesn't matter how much reassurance you get, it just doesn't seem to stick. Where you're constantly, and I mean constantly, looking outside of yourself for some kind of proof that you're okay. For a lot of people, this is way more than just a fleeting insecurity. It's a constant, exhausting reality.
So let's start with the absolute fundamentals here. For someone with BPD, this relentless search for validation, it isn't about vanity. It's not about just being needy. No, it's a deeply ingrained survival strategy, one that's born from a really fractured internal world.
At its very core, you have to see validation seeking as a coping mechanism. I mean, when your own sense of who you are feels shaky, or maybe even like it's not there at all, which is a core feature of BPD, you're kind of forced to rely on these outside signals to tell you who you are, if you're worthy, if you're even safe. It's like trying to build a foundation on ground that's constantly shifting beneath your feet.
Wow, this metaphor is just so powerful, isn't it? Really picture that blurry reflection. You know, validation from someone else, a compliment, a simple word of reassurance, it sharpens that image for just a second. You can finally see yourself clearly. But then as soon as they turn away, the image it blurs again. And that desperate search for clarity, it starts all over.
Now, to really, truly understand this behavior, we have to look at where it comes from. This isn't something that just appears out of thin air. It's forged in really painful past experiences that end up shaping how a person sees themselves and, well, the entire world.
And these 5 roots, they are all so deeply connected. You know, it often kicks off with childhood invalidation. Basically, being taught over and over that your feelings are wrong or too much. This can easily lead to what's called identity disturbance, which is a really shaky sense of who you even are. That instability then fuels this terrifying fear of abandonment, making you constantly look for proof that people won't leave. And when those intense emotions hijack your system, that's emotional dysregulation, validation feels like the only possible anchor. All of this, together, creates this core belief that you are fundamentally deeply flawed, and that traps you in this really powerful, self-perpetuating cycle.
Okay, so that's the theory, but how does this actually translate from a concept into everyday life? Well, the cycle often plays out in these really subtle, very real-world scenarios.
Here's a classic workplace example. You deliver a fantastic presentation, and your boss says, "Good job." Now, for a lot of people, that's it. They feel good. But for someone caught in this cycle, that's just the beginning. That praise is immediately thrown into question. The mind just starts to spiral, right? Dissecting the tone, the exact words, searching for any tiny proof of insincerity, until that initial "good job" feels completely and totally meaningless. And this perfectly illustrates what happens in romantic relationships. The words "I love you," which are supposed to be a source of comfort and safety, instead trigger this intense fear. The need for validation isn't satisfied. In fact, it gets amplified. This can lead to constantly seeking reassurance or even testing behaviors, not because you want to manipulate someone, but out of this desperate need to quiet the terror that love could just vanish at any second.
And this is such a critical reframe. It is so easy to label this behavior from the outside, but from the inside, it feels like you are fighting for your life. It's about trying to find some stability when your internal world feels like it's in the middle of a constant earthquake. That validation is the hand you're reaching for to stop yourself from falling.
But see, while this strategy gives some temporary relief, it comes at a really high price. This constant search for external approval doesn't just exhaust the person doing it. It has these damaging consequences that ripple outward and inward. The biggest cost, at a whopping 40%, is often relationship strain. It makes sense, right? Partners and friends can feel totally drained by the constant need for reassurance. But the internal costs are just as heavy. The more you rely on other people to tell you you're okay, the less you trust your own judgment. Your own identity becomes even more fragile, totally dependent on who you happen to be with. And finally, the sheer effort of it all leads to this profound emotional burnout.
But here's the hopeful part. This is the good news. While this cycle is deeply, deeply ingrained, it is not unbreakable. The key is to shift the source of validation from out there in the world to inside yourself. It's about forging an inner anchor.
So what does this actually look like in practice? Well, it starts with self-validation.
learning to name and accept your own feelings without judgment. Then use skills from therapies like DBT, that's dialectical behavior therapy, which help create a pause between an emotion and an action. From there, you can develop inner anchors, things like journaling or affirmations that remind you of your own worth. Learning to tolerate distress is absolutely crucial. It means sitting with discomfort without needing someone else to come in and fix it. And finally, professional therapy is so vital to heal those root wounds that started this whole thing.
And this is so important to remember. When you first start telling yourself, my feelings are valid, it might feel like you're lying to yourself. It can feel really foreign, even fake. But it's like building any muscle. Consistency is everything. With each repetition, that inner voice of validation gets a little stronger, a little more believable, until one day it actually becomes your primary source of stability.
So as we start to wrap up, let's just come back to this core idea. Understanding this behavior requires immense compassion. It's a logical, even if it's painful, adaptation to an environment that was illogical and painful. It's about survival. It is not weakness.
And that, right there, is the ultimate truth. The goal isn't to stop needing validation completely. Hey, we're all human. We all need it sometimes. The goal is to realize that the most important and the most stable validation can only come from within. Your worth isn't granted by other people. It's inherent. It's already there.
So, I'll leave you with this question. It doesn't have to be some huge, grand gesture. Not at all. Maybe it's just acknowledging a feeling without judging it. Or maybe it's telling yourself, you know what? I did my best today, and that is enough. What is one small, tiny step you can take on this journey?